As of today, the federal minimum wage is a whopping $7.25. In California, however, the minimum wage varies from $12 to $13 depending on how many employees are employed through a specific business. In a time of COVID, we have to ask ourselves some very difficult questions, one of which being, should we continue to raise the minimum wage? And the answer is no, because it is quite ineffective and actually has a lot of unintended consequences that end up hurting many people throughout our country. So today, we're going to look at 3 different areas of the minimum wage. We're going to look at the history of minimum wage. We're going to look at the consequences of minimum wage. And lastly, we're going to look at the goal of minimum wage in the first place. As for the history of minimum wage, we are going to look at how much has it actually increased over the time since its inception. And next, we're going to look at how polarizing of a topic it is within our country. According to the Department of Labor in 2020, the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, was created in 1940, so 80 years ago, and it was a whopping 40 cents an hour. As of 2007, the minimum wage reached $5.85, and in 2009, it made another jump where it rests now at $7.25. As you can see, it's made incremental changes to adjust for inflation, which it has actually done a pretty decent job of, although the inflation numbers are a bit off, so it does need to go up a little bit to increase or to match inflation, which it should do. However, doing anything more than that is where it becomes very ineffective. And next, we're going to look at the polarization of the minimum wage topic within our country. According to the Targeted News Service in 2020, one of the most common arguments that people make at the time currently is if the pace of growth kept the same as it was in 1968, the minimum wage should actually be $24 right now. But realistically, that wouldn't change our situation very much. It would actually be highly ineffective. So next, we're going to look at the consequences to tell you why. So according to the Wall Street Journal, if we continuously raise the minimum wage, it actually ends up hurting a lot more people than helping, because if we're going to raise the minimum wage, this increases the amount of money that goes into production of any service or product, meaning that companies and businesses actually need to raise their prices. So let's say I made $16 and the minimum wage was $12. Well, not bad. I'm making $4 above minimum wage, so I'm probably doing fine. Let's say the minimum wage is increased to $15. I now make $1 over minimum wage. Still not bad, right? Well, all the prices around me have just increased drastically. Now what? So now I'm struggling as someone who made over minimum wage, and this affects a lot of people, like teachers, like fast food workers, people that are already struggling for money. This is the type of people that this is going to hurt. The people making just above minimum wage are actually going to struggle to pay for the things they did prior to that increase in wage, and yet it never even affected them directly. And that brings me into my next point. This actually affects very, very few people directly. So Wall Street Journal in 2020 explained that only 119,000 people on average had pay directly raised by the minimum wage increases. And realistically, what that means is if we continue to push that farther and farther, it's going to cause businesses to not only keep increasing their prices, but at some point they're going to have to lay off the people working for them, as well as increasing the output per employee that they have. So if their employees are not being 100% productive and not very effective with their work, well, they may or may not get laid off. Something to consider. It actually ends up hurting people more than helping. Lastly, we're going to look at the actual goal of minimum wage in the first place. So according to Cornell University in 2020, the minimum wage was designed to create a minimum standard of living, which is a great thing, although you need to understand that that means a minimum standard of living. It's not anything good, and most people that are around know that you can't live on minimum wage. You need at least 2 minimum wage incomes to live a decent lifestyle at all. So if you're not having your income supplemented through family, or you're maybe going to school and just supplementing your family's income as a whole, well, then a minimum wage job is livable. However, if you were trying to fully focus on surviving and you're outside of school, you will not be able to live a great life on a single minimum wage job, even if you were working full-time. And next, we're going to look at what happens during the economic downturns. So, while downsides of raising the minimum wage aren't really seen during economic stability, which was what we were in prior to COVID, and COVID isn't exactly a normal economic downturn, we need to understand that, because we're not going to see the effects of raising the minimum wage at the moment. But on our next economic downturn, the amount of people that will be unemployed because businesses realistically can't afford more employees is actually going to be a drastically higher number than it was in any other time. So this could cause something very similar to what we had back in 50s and 60s called the Great Depression. So we want to try to avoid that by not continuously raising the minimum wage and hurting the businesses within our own country. So in conclusion, we talked about how the federal minimum wage is a whopping $7.25 federally. Although what that essentially does is just adjust for inflation, which is what it's doing actually pretty well. And the question is, should we continue to raise the minimum wage? And the answer is no, because it is ineffective and has a lot of consequences that aren't directly visible. So we looked at the 3 areas. We looked at the history of minimum wage and how it started and where it started at and how it's grown and how polarizing it is. Then we saw the consequences that showed us that it's not a good choice to consistently raise it because it doesn't solve any problems. And lastly, we looked at the goal of it and how it isn't effective. So therefore, our best option is to not continuously raise the minimum wage. Thank you for listening.